tonight we're going to be talking about building our children's toolkit for stress, anxiety, and school avoidance. We've had lots of people sign up today. We'll also be going through a little bit of the work that we've been doing and the opportunity to join Orly early for parents who are here tonight. Anyone that is navigating the system, anyone that is struggling to support their child, or anyone that is thriving supporting their child as well. We're here to support you every step of the way. And we're really excited to show you a little bit about what that can include, and we'll be popping the link in the chat and showing you a few of the screens that you may see if you do join us on that journey. So who have you got with us tonight? We have myself, as I said. My background is I'm an A&E doctor. So for a number of years, 7 years or so, I've worked as a doctor, and I've worked in A&E for the last few. And it was 2 or 3 years ago when I started seeing a spike in mental health in hospitals. And if you're seeing mental health in hospitals, you're often dealing with people in crisis. And a number of times I supported and cared for young people and really found it a very difficult experience. I was already fairly frustrated with some of the things I was navigating in the NHS, and I decided that it was a good time to look at what we can do to support families and to support young people with their mental health and their social and emotional health. So after a few conversations with Euan, we decided that we were going to take the crazy decision to start a venture, and that was where Orly was born. And over the last couple of years, we've done lots of different things. You guys may have been involved in the webinars that we've hosted, or in some of the other pilots that we've run with testing out different methods to support parents, particularly. And yeah, we're really grateful for anyone that's been along for the journey, and we're really grateful for anyone that is joining us now. I will stop whittering and pass you on to Euan to introduce himself.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Euan. I'm an assistant psychologist and the other co-founder of Orly. My sort of professional background is working in a number of different sort of therapeutic settings over the last few years, in schools, in social care, and now currently working sort of local authority alongside doing this. Also got some personal experience from my family, who sort of struggle with their mental health, and sort of over the years really sort of struggled to access the right support at the right time. So really passionate about providing parents and children, young people, sort of the right opportunities and right sort of chances to get that support, when they need it most. And I'll hand you over to Jo.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jo Mathews, and I'm a clinical psychologist, and I get the amazing job of specialising in working mostly with neurodivergent children and young people. And I'm very excited today to share a little bit more about some therapeutic work and thinking about how to support your child, as well as going into some interventions that will hopefully be really beneficial, especially leading into this Christmas period, which can be full of lovely, lovely things, and also lots of extra stress and challenges to face.
Thanks, Jo. And we were meant to be joined by Roxy and Laura, who have both simultaneously had slight emergencies in the last 2 hours, but they are our Sunderland-based clinicians. So if anyone watching today and joining us is based in Sunderland, you may well see Roxy and Laura if you stick around to engage with Orly. And the other two, Lucy and James, are a couple of other heroes that have joined us in their mission, less on the therapeutic side, but more on helping us understand how to build some technology, which Euan and I haven't done before. So that's super helpful. Next slide.
Yeah, so I'm just going to run us through some housekeeping before we get started. So this the webinar is being recorded, so we'll be able to share that with you after. It is just our faces, so just the clinicians and the sort of Orly team who are being recorded. It's sort of content purposes, but anyone else who's on the webinar, you can't be seen. But we would love you to get involved. However, so there's a chat box, so we can use the Q&A, be able to ask questions and sort of leave comments as long as we go. And then at the end, we will have like a Q&A session where we can sort of run through these and see what similar themes have popped up. Some of the topics we are discussing today can be sensitive, so please be understanding and respectful of the other participants' experiences. We can't give direct therapy, And finally, for more sort of specific guidance on your child or your family or your own experiences, we've got a community which you can sign up to. And then see, tonight is one of our sort of the launch webinar of our OrliJourney, which gives you guys access to fill out a sort of survey and questionnaire about your child and get some a well-being plan, which will be sent out at the end of the week. So yeah, really excited to give you guys the opportunity to do that. And so these, at the start of the webinar, when you signed up, there was a chance to sort of ask some questions. And so these are just some of the ones which popped out, and some sort of themes which we see, really common questions which are asked by parents a lot. We often get questions around sort of supporting an anxious child with like communication, sort of asking around how anxiety can present, understanding where anxiety comes from, and knowing sort of what strategies to use and when they should be used for certain maybe types of anxiety. So hopefully as we go through, some of these will be answered. But again, if more questions pop up, please put them in the chat box. I think it's down on like the bottom right hand side of your screen, if I'm not right. Yeah. So you can pop a message in there. You send that to everyone. And we'll, like I said, we'll try and answer these at the end or as we go.
We've also had a lot of questions recently around school avoidance and navigating some of the systems like the NHS. So a lot of the plans that we will be creating over the next week will have content around that as well.
Great. So this is just a bit of an overview at some of the sort of parental concerns that we see in our day-to-day, and part of the reason why we feel like it's so important to support parents when their child are going through these sort of difficulties. Obviously, parental concern, like 1 in 5 in young people, are now sort of shown as suffering with some sort of mental health condition, and anxiety, it tends to be one of the most common of these. And then you see the other stats on your screen, which is the difficulty in accessing support. So when a child doesn't quite get the support they need, we can see that sort of deteriorate. So whether on a waiting list for NHS support, public services, or like school was struggling to get a referral through on time, these things can have a big impact. And we really want to sort of provide these opportunities for parents to find holistic support within their area, things that make a parent feel like more capable to support their child and feel sort of motivated as well to support their child. So that's kind of what the mental health sort of plans that we have are hopefully going to create. You see a lot of parents are often relying on each other or members of family to get mental health support, and that can be really hard on the family as a system. And in order to try and get the correct information, you often need a professional to support with that. So the things we're going to go through today. So if you just go to the next slide. Yeah, so hopefully we'll be able to get you some answers on these sort of different things today. So we're going to sort of look into what is stress and anxiety and how to support your child with anxiety, and then look into a bit of depth around understanding anxiety and understanding different behaviors and how they might present. And then, like I said, we're going to touch on some emotionally based school avoidance. And then we will finish with a Q&A and going through some more information about the OrliJourney. But yeah, I think we should get started on the content. And I'll hand over to Jo.
We'll start. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And I think it really hits home those stats around kind of how challenging things are, both parenting and as young people. So I wanted to talk a little bit, first of all, about stress and anxiety. And I always kind of start when I'm in sessions with young people or explaining to parents kind of about the brain. I love the brain because I think it really helps young people to understand a bit about what's going on for their experience. So everyone's got a brain, and I always make a fist like this as a starting point. And we are all in our brains able to manage a bit of stress. That's actually quite good for us to have a little bit, because if we're not stressed enough, then actually our brains get really depleted. They're not energized enough. For individuals with ADHD, actually, they need a little bit more stress to kind of actually up them to a really healthy level. So we all need a little bit of stress, and we can manage that. However, stress can kind of build up and up and up. And down at the bottom of our brain, we've got a special bit called the amygdala. And in there, I call her Amy for short. She's underneath and she's protected because she's so important for keeping us alive. She fires off whenever we're in trouble, whenever we're in danger. But she's not amazing at working out what's danger and what's stress. So she's been there for millions of years, and so has got really good at noticing saber-toothed tigers or terrible things about to happen, a kind of new tribe coming in. All of those things would be Amy's absolute moment of real knowing what she's there for. And she would get us in touch and say, right, you need to run away or you need to fight this danger. But she's not great at managing stress. And this is often in the modern world what becomes really difficult, because Amy wants us to run away or fight threats because they're the best things to keep us alive. But in the modern world, actually what we've got are lots and lots of stresses. So all of this front bit of our brain that's in charge of managing things and planning stuff and thinking rationally and figuring problems out all gets disconnected when Amy thinks there's real danger. And because there's so much stress placed on young people, and because actually young people are having a harder time of that because their brains aren't fully developed, so they've got less connections between Amy and the front bit of that brain, that means that they're much more likely to feel Amy going off, wanting to run away or fight, having that fight-flight response. And that's when actually we would see the child be anxious. So that's what anxiety is. It's a response in our brain that says, something's dangerous, I'm not handling this, I need a response to keep myself safe. And I think as a starting point, it's really helpful to understand that, because often when we see behaviours in young people, it's not very clear because, again, we've not got our mature, developed brains. As adults, our brain matures, we think at about age 25. So all of that time up to that point, actually, it's really difficult to stay connected and have all of this planning part of our brain thinking things through. So the reason that anxiety comes along is because when stress builds up, the brain stops thinking rationally, it stops problem solving, it stops sorting things, and it says, this is actually something I find really difficult. And Amy kicks in, and the only thing she knows how to do really well are fight, run away, or freeze until fighting or running away work. And that's the basis of what anxiety is. And that fight, flight, and freeze response is usually the first thing I'd work with a child in understanding. And you can do this at home. There's amazing videos on YouTube for free and available. But just to begin to understand, that's what these feelings are. Because when Amy signals off and she says, right, you want to fight, you want to run away, or you're going to freeze here, she sends loads of signals to the body. And what she does is tell your heart to beat faster, your lungs to take in more air, your body to tense up, your stomach to kind of shut down, and your brain to kind of switch off of thinking about lots of things. So what you get is your heart pumping because it helps you to run faster, to run away or to fight. Your lungs taking in more oxygen because it helps to breathe in, to help you run away or to fight. Your body to tense so that you're ready. So all of these things are really helpful if you're in danger. But the modern world, we don't have all these things actually going after us. What we have are lots of really difficult situations, navigating friendships, navigating all the different demands of school, navigating potential relationship difficulties, navigating anything and everything. And so it's really important to recognise that actually what your child is feeling is this real sense of, oh, I need to get out of this. And they probably can't a lot of the time. And they're not understanding potentially what that is. And so when I talk about Amy, I'll always say a siren, but another really helpful analogy to use would be like a fire alarm. There's nothing wrong in that sense of why you're feeling it, but understanding why you're feeling those things can really, really help. But then, and anxiety is such a pain for this, that it doesn't just happen once that Amy signals off. What starts to happen is every time we go into situations, we get more and more concerned, because usually what happens when we feel anxious, it's such an unpleasant feeling, that kind of tightness in your chest and your heart beating fast and your stomach shutting down so you feel sick and your body's aching. All of that's really, really difficult. And so it's really natural that the thing we do is usually get out because Amy's told us we want to run away, or we kind of bring in some things to try and make us feel safer. And in the short term, that makes complete sense, because when we get out, we feel better. So the brain learns, and Amy learns, well, you did a really good job there, because now you're feeling better. because all this anxiety, all this feeling, all this worry, all this stress has gone away. But what doesn't then happen is we don't learn that actually everything's okay, and that we're in something that, whilst is stressful, it is actually safe. So it can be really, really helpful to give that sense that actually we know what these symptoms are, we know the things that can help, and we also need to give lots of messages to Amy to calm her down, to soothe her, and to tell her we're safe and we're okay. And I've lost the slide. It seems to be just on a toolkit. I don't know if that's happened for other people as well. Oh yeah, pop us through. There we go. So once we start understanding those things, we start to reframe anxiety. So what I mean by that is, rather than this feeling that feels out of control, and often young people I see particularly will be really concerned by this feeling, and they'll think there's a monster inside them. They might start to think, if they're a bit older, that they're going mad, that there's something wrong with their brain, or that there's something wrong with their body and they're kind of unhealthy or ill. And so we really need to get root, because all of those worries that come into our mind get in touch with Amy as well. So now we're not just worried about this one stressful thing that was going on, we're worrying about the symptoms themselves. Oh my gosh, my heart's going again. That means something bad's going to happen. I need to get out of here. So we can see how this snowballs and snowballs. So we want the anxiety to be something that, yeah, is a pain, but we understand it, we know why it's happening, and we actually know things that can bring it back down again. So we're going to work with anxiety rather than against it, in the same way that we're going to work with the brain rather than against it. And pop us along again. So when I'm thinking about that, a really helpful analogy, and my favourite thing to talk to a child about, and you can do this at home with your child, is to draw out an iceberg. It doesn't have to look as good as this image. It can be like as rubbish as my drawings are. So don't be worried about doing this. But having a sheet of paper, drawing out an iceberg and being like, so what are the minute is going on is, what are we seeing with this anxiety? So usually there's some sense of avoidance. So with lots of the people who'd filled in about school avoidance being something that's really challenging, that would be what we see. Or it might be sometimes a bit more subtle for young people. They might have particular things they're avoiding. They might just become like quite agitated and quite tricky. And particularly younger children may kind of feel quite unreasonable, to be honest. Like lots of parents will say, you know, just nothing's right. I could literally say the sky's blue outside and they'll say, no, it's not. You know, there's just senses of, sometimes the things don't feel like they could be anxiety, but underneath there is definitely an experience of anxiety, of those physical symptoms. And what we sometimes see with children is that oppositional behaviour, that argumentative element, is almost their way of distracting themselves from that feeling. So that slight fight or flight response gets channeled into a little bit of fight to just distract themselves away from this really set of uncomfortable feelings. So underneath the surface, which of course is so much bigger, is so much of what we don't see with the iceberg, is what I'm really interested in and what we should all be trying to work with. Because often part of the challenge with anxiety is we all focus really heavily on, they're not going into school, we need to sort that out. But we're not going to sort that out unless we understand why, because there's lots of different reasons why that may be. And particularly for children, I'm always really protective of when we've not understood why, potentially loads of interventions have been thrown at them. And all that does is stress Amy out even more, saying, I don't know what's going on here, but everyone tries to be doing X, Y, and Z to sort me out, and I don't understand what's going on. So again, when we understand, potentially we might have real concern about all these physical things going on in our body when we feel anxious. Or you might find that your child's someone who's quite a thinker, so they might have started to really worry about things. They might have intrusive thoughts. They might have really self-critical thoughts, and they may have kind of like a rumination where they're just going over and over and over things, or dissecting social situations afterwards. There's lots of different things. And this is what I mean about getting a sense of what it might be for your child. And it might be that you need a bit of help from a professional to do this, but just starting to get the conversation going and thinking about that idea that there are things going on underneath the surface. that's what we're aiming to slowly do the detective work on, can often be a really helpful way of thinking about it that can feel quite different to that kind of sense of overwhelm that's really understandable when you see your child distressed and you just really want to help them. And so I wanted to also just kind of check in, in me, like I specialise in working with neurodivergent children, and lots of the young people who struggle with that level of anxiety. We also really want to make sure that we're checking about the things that specifically happen when our brain works a little bit differently to kind of the general populations. And so that could be autism or ADHD. It could be things like dyslexia or dyscalculia. But there's a sense that actually part of things going on underneath the surface are related a bit to just the brain working a little bit differently. So what I would be also really thinking about is that what we see might feel a little bit different. There might be lots of very specific avoidance still, like before, but there also might be rigid routines or a kind of higher frequency and quite a big intensity of meltdowns happening. And then underneath the surface, we want to think about some extra things that really matter. So we want to think a bit about kind of how your child feels when they're put under demand, when they've got too much to think about. So is the environment in school something where actually it's really difficult to process all the information? It's difficult to focus on all the extra tasks we have to do. It's difficult to make sense of all these things going on. We want to think about the social demands of what's it like being in a one-to-one conversation or in a group conversation with friends or talking to a teacher or talking to an unknown adult, because all of these things are extra challenging because the brain works just that bit differently. It has loads of strengths and it's really important to focus on those, but it also has some extra challenges. And then we want to think about sensory profiles as well. So it's really, really important to just have this sense that sometimes lots of anxiety can be caused by real discomfort in terms of textures or smells or visual difficulties. There's lots and lots of, I could talk for the full hour about a sensory profile. So again, thinking about it, even just having a quick conversation that says, what things don't you like? And just seeing what your child says is often really interesting and might change day to day. So the thing that has come through from lots of the support questions that people talked about, and so we just wanted to focus particularly for a moment, is on that idea about emotionally based school avoidance. So this is the term that gets given for when a child is feeling anxious in relation to school. And we have that cycle where, because we're feeling anxious, we then start to avoid the thing that's making us feel anxious. When school is that thing, then that results in school avoidance. And obviously that is a really challenging thing to approach because schools have targets around attendance, for one thing. There's a legal requirement for children to be in school. And obviously it's a source of a huge point of structure, of learning, of social engagement. And so it's a massive thing for parents to be facing this sense of their child not feeling comfortable and able to get into school. And the term was developed because there was a sense of really wanting to push the idea that this is about anxiety. This is about an emotional experience, not a behavioural experience. The avoidance part of it is because of the sense of anxiety. So I'm not approaching these children when I'm working with them in the sense that they are being manipulative, naughty, difficult. And I think just to put that out there, because sometimes that comes up. So just to be really explicit, under the iceberg is what we want to focus on. And that's probably where I'll finish and hand back over.
Thank you, Jo. That was fantastic. There are some questions in the chat that we will come to, and Dr. Jo will be back to answer a few of those. And I would urge anyone, if you've got anything that's come up in that kind of 20 minutes of Jo talking or anything else on your mind, please feel free to put it in the chat. And if not, I'll touch on how you can maybe ask questions that come up a little bit later in the future. But we at Orly are launching. We're launching this week, and we're launching primarily in Sunderland and the Northeast. We recently won a grant award which has allowed us to do this. Everything is completely for free. We will always be free for parents, and we will work closely with schools, and we're already working closely with the NHS up in the Northeast, which is super exciting for us. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what you can access at the moment. The core thing, and we've mentioned this concept of a journey, and we really understand that so much of mental health, emotional health, behavioral health, neurodiversity is a real journey. And so that's why we've kind of based our app and on our kind of process of supporting people as a journey. So we try and give simple steps and guide people along the way. And we want to give the sense that we are there for that journey that people are going on. Basically, we've put something in the chat. We can repost that. I think there's a QR code on the next page. But if you do sign up, you can create a profile. And at the moment, it's about a 20-question assessment that helps us build a survey. There you go, just on cue. It takes about 5 minutes, might take about 10 minutes, depending on how much detail you want to put in there. And it focuses on behaviors to start with, and then looks at strengths, needs, and what you've done on your journey so far. What was helpful, what was not helpful. We will then, particularly over the next kind of month or so as they come in, create them with clinicians like Jo, Carla, Roxy and Laura, and a little bit of ourselves. We will create a personalized journey. And that journey looks a little bit like this. It's going to look different when you guys see it. But it basically includes a few different things. It will create a summary. So you'll basically tell you back in a simple way what you told us. So you've got a nice kind of store of that information. There'll be a toolkit, so things you can do now, which we will add to over time. We won't kind of bombard you with lots of different pieces of content, but there is also a space where you can go and explore more. And we would love to kind of know, and we're using some of these questions to base our content off. But we'd love to know, if the things aren't there and you want questions answered, we will then kind of, create them based off that. There is things you can do next, and this is the clever bit of technology that we're building in the background, which does use a touch of AI, not just yet, but it will do, to choose resources, 3 resources that are in the local area, which tend to be free, and they're your recommendations, and they are with some text that tells you why they're helpful and why they're useful. And then the other things, as you can see on this kind of left-hand screen, are events. So events like this will continue to host. There is Ask an Expert, which is a space on the app where you can send in questions and get an anonymous response. And then there is the WhatsApp community group if you're not part of that. So yeah, that is in a nutshell what we're offering at the moment. Basically, if you would like to be involved, you can sign up. The chat, as I said, is either on the QR code there or the link. We'll try and get your plan completed as quickly as possible. And then you can tell us what you think. We will be hosting one-to-one calls. That's the one thing I haven't mentioned, is that we will be hosting some one-to-one calls with our professionals. So you can come and discuss your plan or ask any questions or just vent to us or, whatever you kind of want to use that time for. There'll be 30 to 45 minutes where you can come and chat to one of the team. So that was it. Promised I wouldn't talk about it too much, but we've had some questions come through on the chat and from before. So please feel free to keep them coming in. But in the meantime, let's go from the top. Jo, what is the best way to get underneath the surface? This is very apt given your neurodiverse and your iceberg of behavior. We're really struggling with our daughter and the why for the anxiety. Do you have any advice for this parent?
Yeah, and it's such a lovely question because it means you've probably been and listened to one of our other things before of when you're mentioning it in that way. It can feel really challenging when there's that sense of we just want to know now, like we want to understand, we want to get to that why. And for lots of young people, it's really difficult and it's actually really demanding. It can feel really demanding to talk about it because the avoidance and that cycle that I kind of mentioned, that sense of avoiding is really entrenched often with anxiety. And so what we're asking our young people to do when we kind of want them to open up is we can see that that's the really helpful, rational thing to do with our really lovely, mature, developed brain. But actually what they're experiencing is, I really don't want to talk about this, particularly maybe at home. in the space that's my kind of safe space where potentially I get away from school and I don't have to think about these things. And so I usually try to do that through interest with a young person. So I don't know about this particular young person, so I'm not kind of making any assumptions about the person's neurodivergence or kind of what might be going on. But I'd usually try to kind of create really nice environments and not talk about the thing for a long time. So and I'd also really recommend those things being side by side things rather than kind of like face on. So tell me, like, what's going on for you? And so like in sessions, I'm like always pretty much sat side by side. We're like, today in clinic, I was decorating some Christmas tree things, some crafts, and we've done like cookie decorating. I play Lego all the time with my young people. So we're kind of fixed and focused on something else. And then there might be some gentle things. But really, there is a sense that what we're trying to build is connection first and foremost. And so it might be that we're even doing those activities and the young person isn't talking to us about those things. But then there might be just gentle times we ask her, this has just been really nice. Like, I feel like sometimes I might lose you a little bit when you're feeling like different to how you're feeling now. And so to just kind of gently phrase those things, to kind of offer out a little bit. And we always want to really explicitly say at different times of the day, not just in times when the child is stressed, a sense of like, I'll always want to hear anything you tell me. And there are lots of really different reasons, but like particularly for neurodivergent children, I will just say that one thing that can be really challenging, the reason sometimes they won't talk to people about their things is because some neurodivergent people can really struggle with lots of facial expressions. And like part of neurodivergence in autism is actually often quite a flattened facial expression, and like very genuine looks of concern from parents or well-intentioned people will often be like quite a lot to process. And so as much as possible, sometimes, even though you care and that's your natural way of showing that care, again, sometimes just a slightly more, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds quite difficult, and not necessarily kind of really ramping up that, oh my gosh, that sounds really hard, and can actually be quite helpful too. So sometimes kind of when little nuggets are offered, kind of quite low key responses that really validate the experience rather than necessarily jumping in to solve, can also just sometimes just help those first bits. But it is really tricky. Can I do one more? Sorry, I feel like I'm talking loads. But just another thing that might be really helpful is sometimes it not being you. So if you have got siblings, so what will be the young person's auntie and uncle, or you've got kind of family friends that have got like older, like teens, early 20s, so you've got a feel of someone who's a bit more of a mentor figure, that's still someone relatively responsible, but that isn't a parent, because often there can just be a really difficult point of life where it's hard to kind of like match to parents. There's a sense of not wanting to worry parents. There's a sense of, actually, I don't know how you're going to react. There's a sense of, oh, this might be too much, and if I open up a bit, you're never going to not know that. Whereas people we step away from in life and we come back to are often slightly more safer people. It's why often there's a real privilege in doing the kind of work that we do, because it's not that we're necessarily doing things any differently sometimes than parents. It's just the sense that the child knows they're not going to see us. And so it feels really safe to impart something and then walk away again. And so all of those things would be kind of hopefully things that start those conversations in different ways.
Yeah, brilliant. I really like the activity. I mean, the side by side is a one that we always refer to, but doing activities to try and take your mind off things, even like the simplest thing of walking, can really just lower that level of tension and stress that lots of us feel when we're faced with, what can feel like a heavy conversation. This is a similar one, but you may want to add something. How to help children while going through anxiety and worries and refusing to talk about. Is there anything you want to build on that last bit, Jo?
Yeah, so I guess there's some extra little bits around that sometimes can help. So sometimes like writing things down can also be really helpful, or drawing them. And like I'll often say to young people I see, like, just getting it out of here matters. So in whatever way that is that works for you is cool with me. So there isn't a sense of there's a right way to tell it, because lots of young people really struggle, particularly neurodivergent people, and because of that kind of challenge in getting it right, when it's like actually human experience isn't necessarily something that's neat and tidy and easy to explain. So if you want to say, oh, I just feel bleh, then that's fine. But equally, if you want to just like build something, like you want to build a Lego person and smash it up, that's cool. Like just bringing a sense of anything is something can often be quite helpful.
Nice. It depends on what the object is you want to smash, I
Lego
guess.
only, sorry.
Careful. Great. The next one, I'll do the fancy thing where it comes on the screen. Dealing with shouting, not engaging, and homework refusal. So probably three fairly separate things in such a nice, succinct question.
Yeah. Just those three. So there is a little bit of a theme to them, I guess, in that I guess what I would put in those of sometimes when we talk about anxiety, we often think about that flight aspect of what Amy signals to us, right? So we often think of the kind of person who's very vulnerable and who will be kind of trying to retreat. And we do have lots of other young people, sometimes hormonally that happens. Sometimes there's just a sense of kind of our genetic makeup where we activate fight mode a little bit quicker. And so then we get to kind of terms of things like oppositional, and that's often when we see the kind of the shouting and the refusal. And it's still a form of avoidance. And I guess I would often be really helping families to think about that, because it's really hard, right? Like your child, and like I've got two kids, they're probably a bit younger than this person because homework's not quite come yet, just spellings. But like, you know, your child shouting at you, like the person you love most in the world kind of coming at you in a way that is not particularly pleasant, is a really difficult thing to deal with. So I would just want to validate, first of all, like it's really hard to be in that situation. And the next bit is then that one step harder, because what I'm going to say is we regulate our children. So because children's brains aren't fully mature yet, they're not going to be able to regulate. And so even up to 25 years old, we're still a bit reliant on the people around us to help us regulate. And that's extra hard sometimes if someone is being a bit threatening or a bit aggressive towards us. So there is that sense of, first of all, it is absolutely okay to take a step away if you feel like you are going to shout back. Like, again, I'm a bit of a person who says, like, I'm not trying to create robots in sessions. I'm not trying to create robot kids. I'm not trying to create robot parents. So if you have shouted at your child, don't be stressed by that. And we're all human. But ideally, to try and regulate our child, we need to be calm. So if you feel like you aren't going to be able to kind of manage that in a calm way, like get yourself away and model that to your child. So a sense of like, this feels like quite a reasonable request. And I feel like your response back to me is a bit threatening right now. So I'm going to take myself away and we're going to carry on the conversation in a little bit, and just giving yourself some time and some space to just regulate. That's number one, because that's a really just helpful technique to show a child how to regulate a little bit. Like, so I'm actually feeling a bit overwhelmed right now by that. I'm just going to take myself away for a bit. I'm going to come back. And almost like as you're walking out the room, a little bit theatrically, if you want to, you are breathing to show, okay, that was quite a lot actually. And to just give that sense of that's what regulation is. Like, that is all emotional regulation is. All Amy needs over and over again is slow, calm breaths. And it sounds so simple, but it is almost impossible to do when you are stressed, when you are beginning to feel anxious, because Amy doesn't want to do it because she wants to keep you alive. So you're fighting against like an inherent sense of survival that has kept us alive for millions of years. So what we're asking people to do is really hard, even though it sounds simple. So regulate yourself, first of all. If your child is demand avoidant, I would involve, or like there's that kind of refusal and slightly oppositional component. I would involve school and get school on board if there is a sense of we are approaching every single day. I'm asking a child to do this, like it's just creating all of it. Because school can help often with that. Like some children I see really struggle with homework coming home. They like school to be at school, home to be at home. So if lots of this oppositional stuff is happening in relation to just homework, then that is a sense sometimes of actually that being the tricky thing. So that's, again, when we think about the iceberg and underneath that surface, like that's what we want to think about. Like, is it just homework? And in which case we need to work on homework not oppositional, challenging things. If it is lots of things, then that's probably the child's go-to strategy for when they're feeling a bit overwhelmed. And it's still the same kind of work where we want to be able to teach a child to regulate and do slightly different things. And you can do that by some level of boundary as well. You can put in things like visual timetables. So if you know you're approaching flashpoints, sometimes it not being you that's going like, you need to do your homework now, but having like a planner on the wall that you've kind of gone through with your child, being like, well, this stuff's coming home. We need to map this out, right? And it just being like, well, the planner says this. So it ain't me. It's not me telling you to do this. The planner has got this up on the wall. And sometimes those little things can sometimes help to diffuse. Not saying all of this is like magic wand level, but they do help.
Super interesting. And there was one coming up for me that I just wanted to ask if you had any insight on, Jo, and that was around the amygdala that you mentioned again, Amy. And do we know if there is any differences in how the amygdala works when we're neurodiverse? Is there anything known about that? What can we kind of gain from that sort of insight?
I'm a bit nervous that there'll be like a neuroscientist on here that will uncover my complete non-proper knowledge, but my knowledge that works with children will explain this to you. So if anyone knows any more about this, please pop it in the chat. But how I would describe it is Amy is under there and she's there to keep us all alive and she detects threats. Well, if you're neurodivergent, there are different things that are threatening. So classically more for an autistic person, and one-to-one communication might be something that feels a bit more threatening because there's lots of demand that places on a person. For a child with ADHD, being asked to transition between like 3 different activities in a school day, like in short succession, feels quite threatening because it was like, hang on a minute, my brain was in this thing and now you've shifted me away and I have to start again. That's really overwhelming. So getting to know your child's profile becomes the thing that's really important in helping what Amy is detecting as a threat. And I briefly touched upon it when I was talking about iceberg as well, but all of that sensory profile element really matters as well, because genuinely some children can just find like the texture of like this sort of woolen jumper, like just horribly itchy, etc. You know, like putting on a school uniform. Seams. I was talking to a parent today about their daughter, seams on tights. You know, it's just disgusting to her, right? That is activating Amy. She's having meltdowns because the seams feel repulsive to her. And so like, we need to wear leggings to school, you know, and it's so simple, like that moment of like, oh my God, we're just making her do something. She can wear trousers, you know, there's these just different options, and we're going to work through bit by bit by bit about what those things are. So that's how I'd think about it. It's just
that's super helpful. It makes so much sense. And the amygdala is such an old part of the brain that it makes sense that it's probably fairly similar in kind of, you know, the way it functions and structure, but the, you know, how it perceives things is different, I guess. And last one before we wrap up, someone in the chat who's also got doctor, unless this was you, Jo, says, what about intrusive thoughts? Will you expand on that? I don't know if there's any more context to that you might need, Jo. Feel free to add some more as Jo starts kind of answering that. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, so intrusive thoughts come up, and they come up for slightly different reasons. So you get intrusive thoughts in a presentation of OCD, not necessarily in neurodivergent children, where I would still link this back to Amy, right? In the intrusive thoughts, for people who don't know, are kind of really distressing thoughts that come into a person's head, and they're difficult to get rid of, right? Because if I ask any of you to not think about a pink fluffy elephant, it's going to be impossible for you to not think about it. And the problem with an intrusive thought is that it comes into your head and it's really distressing. And what everyone on the planet tries to do when they get an intrusive thought and it causes them distress is they go, oh my God, don't think about that. That's awful. So to give you a sort of like these are kind of harm coming to someone or harm coming to yourself or something awful that would cause distress in a young person or into adulthood. So that alerts Amy. The thought alerts Amy. In young people I see in autism and ADHD, it's a similar element of things, but it happens potentially a bit more in ADHD sometimes just because the brain's so quick And so you get so many more thoughts in a hyperactive presentation that it's actually quite likely, if you've got 1,000 thoughts a minute, that one of them is going to be a bit distressing. So if your brain then settles on that thought, then again, that cycle can kick off. In autism, sometimes it's a slightly different thing where the brain gets really stuck on the thought, because moving on from thoughts is quite tricky. And a child then often wants to understand why it's there. So it's not often causing quite as much distress, but there's a sense of, I don't know why I'm thinking it, and that bothers me. So again, under our iceberg, and this is how it starts to get a bit complicated, but like everything has an underneath the iceberg. That's the bit I would say. Everything, there is a bit more to it, and we need to learn what's going on. Is how your child's brain works, to understand that intrusive thought a bit more. Because for the young people I see, and I get very protective about this with OCD, autism and ADHD, the OCD, the therapeutic sessions, we treat it a bit differently. We work with it a little bit differently. So often, and thank you so much for the person adding a bit more, so anything can trigger it, an online game, an image. Often what we try to do is, again, send those signals to Amy to say, oh, what you're saying is to never think about that thought, or to get really freaked out and to do something to, the technical term is like neutralize the thought. But we don't actually want to do that, because it makes the cycle go round and round. So because then we never learn that actually we were okay with the thought. So we do something, and this is one of those ones where I would often recommend there being a little bit of help along the way with it, because what we really need to do is get used to the idea that if we say the thing out loud, or we allow ourselves to think even a little bit of it at first, and we do it little by little by little, but we expose our brain to that thing that causes us stress, over time we learn that awful thing isn't going to happen, and that a thought is a thought. And it's so easy to say, but it is a really tricky thing to do if that's something that's causing huge amounts of distress. So we normally need to learn a bit about Amy first, learn why it's happening, and then feel safe to gently have those senses of, we're going to say these things out loud. Because as soon as they're said, often I'll say to children, it's a bit like saying Voldemort in Harry Potter. Like, children won't mention it because it's, oh, that's awful, that's what happens. But actually, once we say it, the power gets lost to it. And it's the same with intrusive thoughts. We want to expose ourselves a little bit, but we do that in a really safe way, and often with someone who kind of knows what they're doing. Hopefully that helps.
Brilliant. Yeah, I feel like that was super helpful. And like I said, once you're into the Orly app, there is Ask an Expert, which is a feature that you can kind of pop more questions like that, and we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible with similar responses. Jo, I always learn so much when I sit on these webinars with you, so thank you very much. It really is a pleasure and an honor to have you supporting us on this journey and supporting all of the people that turned up tonight. So thank you for giving us your time between 8 and 9 p.m. on a school night. And
thank you so much for having me. It's always lovely to talk about the things.
No worries. Thank you so much, everyone. And we will see you again, hopefully very soon.